Any questions? Sally?
I don't have a question. I guess I'm just a little overwhelmed with and enjoyed so much the juxtaposition of Jim's humor and Jennifer's suffering. It was quite a reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'd be interested in hearing how both Jim and Jennifer came to write poetry, to how life took them to writing.
Always a great question. Jim, do you want to go first?
No, but I will.
Okay.
Well, as writers, we tend to reflect back on it. So I have different versions because I'm not exactly sure. But one thing that got me writing, that was pretty clear, was that I went to remedial speech class from kindergarten through 8th grade. Actually, in 8th grade, I graduated, and but by that point, my personality was pretty much firmed up, and it become part of my personality not to talk around people I didn't trust. It wasn't like I was persecuted, but if somebody wanted to tease me, it was a real vehicle, was just to make fun of the way I talked. So I tended to kind of hold back, and writing kind of provided this outlet on the page where no one could make any comments about, how I was presenting the work, except they couldn't read my handwriting. But, I developed that habit so that when one of my high school teachers said, "Oh, you should try writing on your own," because I'd written some kind of quote creative response to some historical thing. I was already writing on my own. I didn't call them poems, but then he took me over. The history teacher took me to an English teacher, and he said, "Oh, these are poems." And I wasn't crazy about that idea because I didn't like poetry, because I had these misconceptions based on how I was taught at that time. But I couldn't stop writing at that point. I was hooked.
Great. Thank you. Jennifer?
I think probably around the same time that Jim was writing and started writing in high school, I started writing. I always knew that I wanted to be a writer since I was about 4 years old. My mom would buy me books and leave them on my bed, and I loved reading more than anything else. That's all I ever wanted to do, is to be a writer. But I didn't start writing poetry until I was in high school, and my favorite teacher died in a car accident when he was 26 years old, visiting his family, getting milk during President's Weekend in 1988. And so I was almost, so a week before my birthday, I was almost 15 years old, and I just started writing poems to deal with that tragedy of him dying at 26, and I didn't understand. So, and then that summer I went to a program in Princeton I got a scholarship to study Romanticism and Revolution, and we had a teacher who taught us Keats, and that was it. And then I went to Brown, and I studied with Michael Harper and C.D. Wright and Arnold Weinstein, and I majored in the modernist novel, and I wrote poems on the side. And then I went to Columbia and studied with Richard Howard, and he published my first poems in Paris Review. So I've been writing ever since then. And then, Anna's autism kind of took me off of the teaching path that I was on, but I started teaching again in 2013, and a lot of those students are here tonight. And so teaching is my great love, other than writing. And so I've been lucky to have a lot of students over the past 11 years at the Hudson Valley Writer Center, and I've helped them publish their books and see their writing grow and change and get out into the world. So that has been a real joy for me, to see these other writers and help them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you.
Robin put a comment in the chat. She said, I always want to know what the poets would like us to ask. So what's a question that you've never been asked that you wish you had been?
That's a good question. I don't know. I always like what Sigrid Nunes says, which is she quotes Virginia Woolf, and she just says that, Virginia Woolf says that it doesn't matter whether your work lasts forever or for a day, but that you should write whatever you need to write and whatever you want to write. And then as long as you're doing that, you're doing something worthwhile. So my new poems are about Virginia Woolf, so she's on my mind. But her quotes are amazing, and her letters and her diaries are amazing. So I recommend going to Virginia Woolf when you need good advice, although not what she did last, but the rest of it.
Yeah.
I think is very good advice.
Great answer. Thank you.
I appreciate you going first, Jennifer, to give me time to think of something, but I'm still drawing a blank. I guess these readings still kind of terrify me, so I just
Yeah.
I'm actually afraid to ask.
Q&A is especially nerve-wracking because you don't know what people are going to ask, and so.
Oh man, yeah. I once there was almost a brawl at one of my readings because of the Q&A.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Tell us.
Well, okay. I moved to Pittsburgh, and I taught at Carnegie Mellon University for 40 years. So I moved to Pittsburgh to teach there in 1981. And my first reading in town, this guy over at the University of Pittsburgh, which is very close to Carnegie Mellon, teaching a course called Working Class Literature. And he invited me to do a reading over there because he had read some of my work. And during the Q&A, after that, maybe this is part of my fear of Q&As, this guy got up and he said, well, what you're writing is not poetry. And you're just flaunting your working class genitals, which I thought would make a good title for a book, actually, but I never used it. But and then he said he was appalled that I was teaching anywhere, and luckily some people got up to defend me, but people were standing up and shouting at each other like I wasn't even there. So it was quite the scene. A memorable welcome.
Jim, have
to
you
Pittsburgh.
written about that? Have you written about that story?
No, maybe I should. I mean, everybody has reading stories after you've done a couple, but that one really was memorable. But I actually made a couple of friends in Pittsburgh because I'd only been in town a few months, and then afterwards, a bunch of people went out to the bar, and actually, it was an interesting icebreaker for me being a new writer in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's a great story. Love it. I feel
Well,
honored
you
to
got the
share.
last laugh, Jim. You were taught there for 40, however many years, 40 something years. So you won.
Great. Any other questions, comments before we end it's been a wonderful evening. Hey, thank you again. Another round of applause.
Thank you all for showing up.
Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Jim and Judy.
Well, thank you too, to both of you and everyone else.